Today we're going to be looking at the new beginning in Noah. And before the flood, during the flood, after the flood, Genesis 6 through 11. Welcome, this is People, the free gift, where we ground believers in their identity in Christ and equip them to reach those caught in religion. If you're new to the channel, go ahead and click that subscribe button so that you don't miss any future content as we go verse by verse through the Bible together in community here on YouTube. And so if you've always wanted to study the Bible, come and do it with us. Get your tools, get your questions answered. And so let's go ahead and jump into our content for today. Like I said, we're going to be starting in Genesis 6 and working our way through Genesis 11. So, bird's eye view. If you want to go back to the beginning of the week, you can go ahead and click in the cards in the description, the playlist Study Through the Bible, and you can go back to Genesis 6 and catch up with us and then join us back here for the summary review. Or you can just jump in right now with us. And so, first of all, we need to understand what was going on before the flood. We need to understand why God chose to resort to sending a global flood. And yes, I said global, and we'll get to that in a second. What were the circumstances on the earth and in humanity that caused God to take such a drastic action? First of all, before we get into this, last week we talked about how in the genealogy in Genesis 5, there's a little clue there that's hidden in the name of Enoch's son, Methuselah. His name means his death shall bring, and he lived 969 years. The very year that he died was the year that the flood ended, which means that his name was a prophecy, and surprise, it was given to a prophet named Enoch. And that means that Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, and Noah, 4 generations, were preaching on the flood for 969 years. And that shows the long suffering and the patience of God, and knowing that he was going to send a flood. And 120 years into that, left, he has Noah and his sons building an ark in their driveway as a warning, a physical symbol of the prophecy and the warning of the flood that's going to come. So Jesus compares that to the second coming, and he says, just like it was in the days of Noah. They were eating, they were drinking, they were given in marriage until the day that Noah and his family entered the ark. And only 8 people, we're told by Peter, were saved on that boat. So, what's going on that leads up to this? In Genesis 6:2, it says that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. So let's stop right there and ask ourselves what's going on. And I know that there are people who have different viewpoints on this. But if you've seen my videos leading up to this, you know that I believe that the sons of God, if you just look at it in the Old Testament as a whole context, the sons of God were a special group of angels. I wouldn't go so far as to say they were part of a divine council. I would say that they were a specific group of angels that has specific access to God, has specific roles to play. But these particular angels, sons of God, they chose to be disobedient in a very particular way. And so you have this contrast, the sons of God and the daughters of men, which would, of course, be human women. That they looked upon these human women and they thought, we want to have relations with them. We want to, have a relationship with them. If you've ever seen the movie City of Angels, with Nicolas Cage, it kind of picks up on this concept. And kind of twist it a little bit. But that basic concept, that the angels are looking down at humans as this special creation of God, becoming jealous. And you have Lucifer, who has already rebelled. He's already been kicked out of heaven. And so now he starts recruiting within the angelic realm, of course. And then he also starts going after God's prized possession, the human race. So he tempts Eve in the garden, and in the garden he says, you can be like God if you eat this fruit. And so they ate the fruit, and their eyes were opened, and their separation from God, from each other, from humanity, and all these things. But God comes on the scene, and he says, the seed of the woman will crush the head of the serpent, even though he will bruise his heel. And so in so doing, in so saying, God has announced, he declared war on the serpent by saying that a human being is going to be born. He's going to be born supernaturally and miraculously, and he is going to be the unveiling or undoing of Satan. So naturally, if you are Satan and you know that, the first thing that you would attack would be humanity. Specifically, you would go after the gene pool of humanity. And that seems to be exactly what is driving this thing that we read about in Genesis 6. That you have angels, a specific group of angels, who are having offspring with humans. And this is the same thing that we see in all the other cultures when you read about like the Greek titans, those who were not quite God, not quite man, but they were kind of half-breeds. It's that same kind of idea. And every culture seems to have this idea of this thing that's going on. And by the way, every culture seems to have a flood narrative as well. And that testifies to the fact that something was going on and somebody's telling the truth, more than likely. And I believe that that is the Bible and the biblical account. So Genesis 6:2, you have the sons of God coming into the daughters of men and having these offspring. And Genesis 6:4 picks up on that, and it says they were giants in the earth in those days. Now that word giants in Hebrew is Nephilim, which means fallen ones. Gigantes in the Greek, from the Septuagint, is where you get the word giants. And that has to do with the size of these individuals. And we learn a lot about that later. You know, Goliath, who was one of these, later on, way later on. And he said he was 9 foot tall. And we have descriptions where they have like 6 fingers, and they're just huge, huge specimens. And the Nephilim, fallen ones, is what the word means. Okay, these were not human. These were not angels. These were half-breeds. They were fallen ones. And also after that, so this is exactly what I was talking about. When they get to the promised land later, when they get into, when they're well established in the promised land, and David goes out and he sees Goliath, okay? And Goliath, we learn, had 4 brothers. And so that's why David had 5 stones, you would say. And so this is going on way later as well. When the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children unto them, the same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. And so that's, of course, what you see in mythology and other cultures all around the world, the stories and the tales of these creatures who were not human. They were not deity. They were half-breed. And that's exactly one of the things that was going on prior to the flood. The second thing is this. In verse 5, it says, God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart were only evil continually. So you fast forward from the fall to the first murder in Genesis 4, Cain and Abel, all the way. Now we got the thoughts and intents of men's hearts were evil continually. And so you have this whole idea of total depravity that, in every way, in every part of us is tainted with sin. And so we have wickedness on the earth that is run rampant and throughout the human race. And then Genesis 6:6, it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. And so you have grief that's going on in the part of God. Here, his pinnacle of his creation, created in his image and his likeness, had fallen, but now they had fallen to such a state that the thoughts and intents of their hearts were wicked continually. And now you have the perversion within the human race in the DNA. And so God he's grieved in his heart at what is going on. And again, it's only talked about like the wrath of God and the anger of God, and when you talk about the flood. But here you have the grief that was in his heart over what was going on. And then you also have grace. In Genesis 6:8, it says, "But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord." And obviously, that's one of my favorite verses in this entire passage. My firstborn son is named Noah, which means comfort or rest, as we saw last week. And it's not that Noah, and a lot of people get confused over the story of the flood in a lot of different ways. The way that we depict it, portray it, and tell it, we get it confused in a lot of different ways. And one is in the character of Noah. And, people talk about it as like everybody was wicked, but Noah was good. And so God went with Noah. But it's not that. It's not that God will only extended grace to Noah or only offered grace to Noah. We saw that the flood was preached on for 4 generations from Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, and Noah. And 969 years. And so the grace of God was being extended to all. But it says that Noah found that grace. Noah received that grace. He was willing to listen to God. In the same way that there's a lot of people on the earth right now. And Jesus is coming, and there is a message that, get yourself ready. Jesus is coming. He's died for your sins. He's risen from the dead. He's offering forgiveness. He's offering grace. But there is only some who receive it and who find it. And thankfully, that's more than it was in Noah's day. But Noah, he found grace, the unmerited, undeserved favor of God in the eyes of the Lord. And in verse 9, it says that Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations. So Noah was justified. How was a man justified? Abram, we're going to get to this next week, but Abram believed God and it was counted to him for righteousness. And he's perfect in his generations, in the Hebrews, genealogies. Meaning that Noah also had another criteria that God was looking for. Somebody who he could start over with, whose gene line had not been tainted by the effects of the events of the sons of God. And so this is the messianic line. Noah was also right in line after, Adam, Seth, and then you got all of these guys. Enoch is in there, Methuselah, Lamech, Noah. And that's why Genesis 5 is there. It's telling you the messianic line, the line of promise. And so Noah he did receive grace, which made him justified, and he was perfect in his genealogies, and he was in the messianic line. So he was a perfect candidate for God to start over and keep his promises that he had made in the past. So let's talk about the circumstances of the flood. During the flood. Was the flood global? This is something that people ask, all the time. And you have a lot of scholars who are going in the direction of believing that it wasn't. And trying to make a case from the Bible that it wasn't. That in fact, that it was a local flood. And a lot of the other cultures and the tales that they say, a lot of them can be read that way. But I personally do not believe that you can read the account in Genesis as a local flood. And there's a number of reasons that we're going to get into as we go through Genesis 6 through 9. And even in the New Testament passages that speak to the flood. So let's go ahead and read verse 13. And the end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them and the earth. All flesh is come before me. Genesis 6:17, to destroy all flesh, wherein is the breath of life, everything that has the breath of life, from under heaven, and everything that is in the earth shall die. Genesis 7:4, every living substance that I have made will I destroy from the face of the earth. Genesis 7:23, it says, the waters prevailed exceedingly upon the earth, and on the high hills that were under the whole heaven were covered, 15 cubits upward, and the waters prevailed, and the mountains were covered, and all flesh died that moved upon the earth, both of fowl, and of cattle, and of beasts, and of every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth, and every man, all in whom his nostrils is the breath of life, and all that was in the dry land died, and every living substance was destroyed, which was upon the face of the ground, both man and cattle and creeping things, and the fowl of the heavens that were destroyed from the earth. And Noah only remained alive, and they that were with him in the ark. Now, it's really, really hard when it says that only Noah was alive, and everything that had the breath of life was destroyed in that flood, to believe that that was just describing a local flood. And then in Genesis 9:11 it says, I will establish my covenant with you. Neither shall all flesh be cut off any more by the waters of a flood, neither shall there any more be a flood to destroy the earth. And so the sign of the rainbow and the promise and the covenant of God after the flood to Noah and all that were alive and came off with him, he makes the promise, I will never again destroy the earth and all of humanity in the way that I have just now with the flood. Now, in 2 Peter, Peter tells you to read the fine print, and he says the second time is going to be by fire. But if this was a local flood, I live in the town of Roundup, Montana, and a few years ago, there was a picture of a restaurant in our town that was just completely underneath water. And the whole floodplain along with it, running up to the house that I live in right now. If God only made a promise to never send a flood that was a local flood again, then even in my own town, then he would be a liar. Is God a liar? I don't believe he is. So I have to believe that the flood was global. And the evidence seems to suggest that. So another question that people ask about the flood is, how could all the animals fit? Genesis 6:19 says this, of every living thing of all flesh, 2 of every sort shalt thou bring into the ark to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female. Genesis 7:2, of every clean beast that thou shalt take by 7s, the male and his female, and of beasts that are not clean by 2, the male and the female. And so this uses the language of Genesis 1. And if you were with us for our study in Genesis 1, it says that God created them after their kind, and they would reproduce after their kind. Now, when you're talking about the language of kind, you're not talking about species. That is the specific type of animal. So if I'm talking in the language of dog, I'm going to say the family of dog, the canine family. And that canine family includes wolves, includes coyotes, and includes our household dogs. It includes a whole lot other than that. What God instructed Noah, and you know, going down to like black labs, golden retrievers, bulldogs, and all the different species and types of dogs that we have. What God instructed Noah to do was that of the clean animals, gather 7 of each kind, and unclean animals 2 of each kind. And that was saying, like, of the dog family, that you would have a representative, male and female at least, and if it was clean, 7, so to leave room for that sacrifice after the flood. And so that means that it would very easily fit all of the animals on the ark, because you only had families of animals that would be on the ark with him. The other question that's related to this is, if dinosaurs lived alongside humans, which seems to be what the Bible teaches, then how did dinosaurs get on the ark? I mean, that seems ridiculous and preposterous, because we see Jurassic Park, Jurassic World, and we see just huge monstrosities of dinosaurs. And yes, there were huge dinosaurs, but you know what the average size of a dinosaur fossil is? About the size of a chicken. And so if you only have to have a representative of the dinosaur family on the ark, then all you have to have is a chicken-sized creature. And so that's how all the animals could fit on the ark. The third thing that you need to understand is in Genesis 7:11, it's not just rain. We have this idea of the flood that it was just like it rained for 40 days. And so we think when it rains outside, yes, if it rained for 40 days, that would be a lot of water and there would be flood and it would be a local flood and that would be fine. But that's not the entirety of what was happening when God unleashed this thing. In Genesis 7:11, it says, the fountains of the great deep were broken up and the windows of heaven were opened. And so in Genesis 1, and when it says, I separated the waters above the heavens from the waters under the heavens, which seems to suggest that there were waters in the heavens, creating what some have suggested as a global tropical environment, an extra layer of protection that God had provided, and could have very well been the reason for the long lives that you see in Genesis 5 and previous. And notice that after the flood, those lifespans go drastically down. You should know that they have found animal fossils all over the earth in which they have tropical plants in their mouth that they were eating, including the North and South Pole. So how does that happen unless the world was at one time a tropical environment? And so there's a lot of different things that we can get into that would suggest that it was a global flood, and before the global flood that there was a global environment and it was a very ideal atmosphere. And 2 Peter 3 actually uses the language that says the earth that then was perished in the flood. And it's a whole new world after the flood. So you have the windows of heaven, that water above the heavens that was opened and unleashed on the earth, but you also have the fountains of the great deep that were opened up. And so you have just this huge catastrophe. That's like volcanic eruptions that are coming from underneath, from like the Earth's core that are shooting out. And so it also unstabilized the Earth on that level as well. And so you have that all going on for a period of 40 days and 40 nights. And so it's no wonder that you get to Genesis 8 and 9 and you find that it took 150 days for those waters to subside and to go off into steam and into the atmosphere and be soaked into the dry land and all those different things before they could get off of the ark. So the last thing that you need to know about the flood itself is that the ark was Jesus. Here's what I mean by that. We showed you in Genesis 1 through 5 how almost everything, time you turned around, everything is pointing to Jesus. And it's not surprising because most of the Old Testament, it has been said that the New Testament is in the Old Testament concealed, and the Old Testament is in the New Testament revealed. Meaning that there are lots of pictures and types and shadows in the Old Testament that are all pointing forward to the person and the work of Jesus, the Messiah, as God's ultimate solution for our sin. And so here's the parallel. In Genesis 7:16, it says that the Lord shut him in, meaning that there was one door on the ark and Noah didn't operate the door. God did. And so when Noah and his family and all the animals were in the ark, it says that, and it began to rain, it says God shut the door, which means no one's getting in after that door was shut, and it means no one's getting out once they've been in. And so in that sense, it's comparable to our salvation. God opens doors that no one can shut, and he shuts doors no one can open. And the same thing, Jesus said in John 10, I am the gate of the sheep. I am the door of the sheep. And you can come in through me. I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no man comes to the Father but through me. And so in that way it's comparable to Jesus. But I'm going to show you another way. In Genesis 8:4, it says the ark rested in the 7th month and the 17th day of the month upon the mountains of Ararat. Now Jesus would say, "Come unto me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." But it goes even beyond that. You see, the Jewish people really have two calendars. There's the religious calendar that was at Passover. God actually switched their calendar, and he says that this month, Nisan, I'm going to make the first month, okay? But you had the civil calendar, and that went by the dates that you have all through since creation, okay? Now, the 17th day of the month in the 7th month happens to be in the religious calendar the 17th of Nisan. Does anybody have any idea what happened on the 17th of Nisan? Anybody have any idea what happens on the 14th of Nisan? The Passover. The 17th of Nisan is the Feast of First Fruits, the Resurrection Day. The day in anticipation when Jesus resurrected from the dead, giving us our new beginning in Jesus as the same day in which the ark rested and gave us our new beginning in Noah. The ark is Jesus. So let's talk about the events after the flood. So they get out of the boat after Noah sends a couple of birds, and he finds out that, okay, now there's dry land. 150 days later, he's going out. He makes a sacrifice. Genesis 8:22, it says, "The Lord said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground anymore for man's sake. For the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I again smite any more every living thing, as I have done. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease." So God says, I'm not going to do that ever again. And then 9:16, he says, "This is the token of the covenant which I make between you and me, you, and every living thing that is with you, for perpetual generations. I do set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be a token of a covenant between me and the earth. And it shall come to pass when I bring a cloud over the earth that the bow shall be seen in the cloud, and I will remember my covenant which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh. And the water shall no more become a flood to destroy all flesh, and the bow shall be in the cloud, and I will look upon it, and that I may remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is upon the earth." And so when you see a rainbow in the sky after it rains, that is the symbol of God's covenant that he made with Noah. That is the original meaning of the rainbow and its significance and its symbolism. Again, if it was just a local flood, then that promise would mean absolutely nothing. And another thing that happened after the flood is Genesis 9:6. "Whoso shed man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed, for in the image of God he made he man." So God institutes this system that says that if somebody sheds man's blood, then you should put them to death. They deserve to die in order to in order to deal with the sin of murder and shedding the blood of the image of God. Going along with this, and I didn't have it in my notes, but the other thing that changed is the diet. You notice that in Genesis 1, it said that God gave the plants to the animals and to humans as food. But after the flood, he says, I give you the animals for food as well. Genesis 11:7. Here's the interesting thing. If you were to ask somebody that's in the ancient world, what's wrong with the world? They wouldn't just say the fall. They would say the fall, the flood, and the Tower of Babel. And that's exactly what we've covered so far in our study of Genesis. For those of you who don't know, in Genesis 11:7, the Lord said, "Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language, and this is they begin to do, and nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined to do. Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech." What was going on is in the plains of Shinar in the city of Babel, they were building a tower. The people said, let's build a tower that reaches to the heavens. And therefore, they weren't doing it to communicate with God or to have a relationship with God. They were doing it to basically become their own God. And so God looks down and he says, if we don't stop them, there's nothing that these people would not be able to do, because they're all of one mind, they're all of one heart. And so it doesn't take long after the flood to get back to a state in which the people are united in doing wicked things and walking away from the one true God. And so God says here, the way I'm going to deal with it this time, I'm not going to destroy them, I'm not going to start over with somebody. I'm just going to confuse their languages, and in so doing, they're going to scatter all over the world, and they're going to gather in cloisters that they would be able to do. So this is the origin of all the different language groups. And then we also saw in Genesis 10 that the people were divided. So in Genesis 11, verse 8, the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of the earth. And in Genesis 10, you see how the three sons of Noah and their descendants were scattered abroad over the whole earth. And you can go back and watch my video covering Genesis 10, and I show you on a map where that all plays out and where they all scattered to. And so you have the origin of the languages of the world. You have the origin of the ethnicities and the different people groups around the world. And so just like we were talking about that the genetic diversity within a dog family could create all the different types of dogs and dog species, so the human family through Noah and his three sons had the diversity to create all of the different ethnicities, all of the different cultural distinctives, all the different things. And also after Babel, as people group together who speak a common language and they go to a specific place, then the gene pool becomes even more narrowed. And when it becomes more narrowed, then distinctive features start to become more prominent among those different people groups. And this is the reason why the idea of racism and the idea of, looking down upon one group of people versus another group of people just because there's difference in language, difference in skin color, difference in features, or difference in cultural identities is ridiculous, because we are all descended from one ancestor. And it's interesting how even science is beginning to come along and back up what the Bible has taught all along. Meanwhile, you have on the other side, you have evolution, which is teaching survival of the fittest. And so when you teach survival of the fittest, is it really surprising that someone would come along and say, well, our gene pool is better than their gene pool, so let's get rid of that gene pool and let's just have a race of just our gene pool? Seems to make sense to me. But if you come from the Bible standpoint, where we all come from the same ancestor, and we're all creations of God, and we're all loved by God, and Jesus died for every single one of us, then there's no reason to treat any other human being differently and look down upon them because of their gender, because of their culture, because of their language, because of their race. Absolutely none. And so, if you want to study through the Bible with us, here's how you do it. Just go, like I said, through the cards or to the description down below. Look for the playlist, Study Through the Bible. And you can either start from the beginning, or you can pick up with us right here and right now, and moving forward as we study next week the life of Abram. And so I give you daily study assignments and you do them that day. And then the next day, I have a video that's covering that section of scripture and that assignment. And if I don't cover something that you have a question about, you can feel free to ask that in the questions, comments section. And then I will take some of those and create my weekly Q&A video. And then I do my weekly summary video as well, which you just watched. And then we also have discussion questions that go along with that on day 7 of each day. And so I invite you to join us and come and be a part of this with us. And until next time, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Give us a thumbs up on this video if you like the content for today. Subscribe or share this video with others in your life who want to understand the Bible and study it for themselves, and do it in community here on YouTube. Give them the tools they need and get them the answers to the questions that they have. And until next time, may God's grace be with you.